Well, weeds can either develop resistance to a herbicide, and you sort of got to think about that as putting on a big bit of armour and being able to survive a herbicide attack on that weed. But also weeds, when they've sort of been in fields and they've been exposed to herbicides or weed control practices, they learn how to evade those practices. Okay, anything that's been done in a ritualistic way, in a very sequential manner over a lot of years, the population start to figure that out. So what could we sort of expect? Well, things like delayed emergence. That's in that way weeds actually are able to come up after the pre-emergent knockdown. In that way they're evading the application that would normally kill them. Another situation might be pod or weed shedding, seed shedding on plants before harvest weed seed control, and that's sort of quite heavily related, and also things like a change in flowering time, because a lot of farmers do crop topping to knock out those flowers, and the populations actually change their flowering time in response to that. Currently our recommendation is to be as diverse as possible, but the question is diverse enough, and are we really being diverse? So by identifying how weeds might be adapting or evading our farming systems, gives us an idea about how we might have to tweak our farming systems at the edge just in order to maintain the effectiveness of our weed control. A couple of years ago we did a fairly large study looking at how wild radish can change its time of flowering, and our thought was that early flowering wild radish would set its pods early, mature them early and shed them early before harvest. And what we found was that wild radish populations, when selected for 5 generations for early flowering, or the earliest flowering individuals, what we found was that those guys actually halved their time to flowering compared to the original population. So I think the original population, 50% of the population flowered about 50 odd days after emergence, but we were having this early selected line flowering after less than 25 days after emergence. And some of these guys were actually flowering just after the 3-leaf stage. They were tiny and they were starting to flower. So wild radish has an incredible genetic ability to adapt. And one of the studies we are doing at the moment is we're looking at whether early flowering in wild radish actually makes them more susceptible to crop competition. So I've got a master's student, a Miss C Sun, and she's actually working at the moment where she's got these early flowering lines, a very, very late flowering line and a standard line, and they all come from the same original parent. So all the genetic background's the same. And we're actually seeing whether the early flowering actually puts that species at a disadvantage against a competitive crop. Now we ask the question, why does that matter? Well, it does matter when it comes to keeping harvest weed seed control alive. So any potential advantage that might be selected through harvest weed seed control over time is likely to be a complete disadvantage in the midst of that highly competitive crop. So the competitive crop is going to sort of act as a bit of a moderating force to any potential shifts we have to this harvest weed seed control selection. This crop competition really is a central component that helps every other weed control tactic out. So crop competition is incredibly important.